Well, thank you for joining us for another Gateway podcast. We are so excited to have our pastor, Jesse from Kamoka. And we're going to start a conversation in our series. The whole year we've been covering about living free. And so we wanted to invite Jesse because he has an amazing story to share with us today. And our overall conversation is going to be men and their mental health. And so we're going to just dive right in. So why don't you join us? Let's say hi to Jesse.
Hi, Leigh-Anne, and thanks for having me. I'm really excited about this topic. I've been waiting to have this interview with you and talk about these things because it's something I've become really passionate about myself, men and mental health, over the past couple years in my life. So thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for coming in. So when we say men and mental health, what are some images that come to mind for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think men, we always wrestle with feelings. Those are some of the biggest things is actually, what are we feeling? And because I always say we only really feel 3 or 4 things: angry, happy, sad, and then hungry.
Oh, I was wondering when you were going to get to that one.
Hungry, so that's all I'm feeling. That's all I know. And I think whenever someone brings up men and mental health, I think of feelings and emotions, because men, we don't like that. I say we don't like the F word, feelings. That makes us go, ugh, you want me to talk about my feelings? I don't want to talk about my feelings because I only feel those few things. So when you bring it up, I think, man, I wish more men, including myself, I wish we had a better vocabulary when it came to describing what we're actually feeling and what's going on the inside, because we would be better for it in the long run if we could start identifying some of those things.
Yeah, I like the one thing you said is like the F word. Everyone's like, oh, he's going to drop and it's not the F word that we were expecting there. Yeah. My other question for you is, what do you think about when people are like men in counseling? What does that like? Does that you're like, what does that do? Anything in your brain? Does that like?
Well, okay. So when you say counselor to me, I think, oh boy, I think of a chaise lounge. I've got my, what? You want me to lie down, put a pillow under my head, and then talk about my feelings? When you say counseling and therapist, it actually makes me go, well, if you ask me, Jesse, you should go to counseling or therapy, it makes me say, what's wrong with me? Ooh. I have something wrong with me, If there's something wrong with me, I'm going to fix it myself, right? And that's the typical, I think, man response, right? Mm-hmm. If there's a problem, I'm going to fix it. We do that when it comes to our home. We do that with our family. So if there's a problem with me, well, I'll look after it. I'll just go fishing for the weekend, and I'll do something fun. I'll sleep it off, and I'll be good. When we know that's actually not the case, that's great for sweeping things under the rug, but not dealing with the issue at hand.
Yeah. And I want to make sure we don't just talk about stereotypes in our conversations. So we're going to talk about men, but not all men will fit into this box of
absolutely,
because masculinity isn't just what you see on a sports field. It's can we just say it's expanding, and we want to not just fit into that stereotype of this is what men do and this is what men feel or don't feel. So if you're in this, if you're listening to us, don't feel like we are saying men are only this, because I think we want to expand that today, and we want to include all types of men.
Yes.
You don't have to be super athletic to have, mental health. You don't have to be super artsy or indie. Men are just men, right?
Yeah, we all deal with these things, right? So some guys are easy, they can identify what's going on easier than others, sure. But we've all dealt with things like anxiety, fear, and anger, and we don't, and I say deal with it, we've had it and experienced it, and maybe we don't know, a lot of us don't know how to deal with it or what to do with it, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's why we're having this conversation today.
I love that. So another thing you just mentioned was don't know how to communicate. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really interesting thing, because therapy, another the way that we talk about it, it's called talk therapy, right? And you're I have to talk about my emotions, but I don't even know what I'm feeling, right?
Yes.
And so for all the men out there who had that thought when Jesse said that, I completely and totally agree. So therapy was developed for women. That's why I think sometimes men, there's some huge hurdles for men to come into therapy, right?
Wow.
So it was created for women who were not functioning well as like a housewife, and they would be like coined hysterical. And even that is like almost insulting today, even to us women, right? You're like, we have to go to therapy when we're hysterical emotionally, right? So there's weight on both sides of this thing, right? And historically, we know women who couldn't function as a housewife, like they couldn't, they weren't proper about, having a meal by 5, and certain dresses they had to wear and certain hairstyles and having a perfect image and meeting up with the Joneses and all these expectations. They were deemed hysterical, especially if they had broken down in public. And so it's a loaded, this idea of therapy can be really loaded before both men and women come in. And so we just want to normalize that. It makes sense that it can be, even when I was a kid, you had to have major problems to come to therapy. Yeah. And so we want to say, in our field at least, it doesn't have to be that, but why don't we just get real about some things that we know men suffer from? So maybe you can help us in that way. Sure. So what are some ways that you think that men really suffer alone? Because I feel like that's what I hear in my office, is that men, because you said they try to fix the problem. Right. And I'm curious what you meant by that.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you brought up how counseling was originally for women and therapy and all of this, right? Because I think in some ways our culture has really flipped. We have a lot of women driving our culture right now, and a lot of men, kind of pushed back. Maybe intimidation, maybe, I don't know, whatever. But now men more than ever really need someone to talk to and counseling. And so, yeah, there's lots of different things that men will go through emotionally. And this journey, for some, can be very dark and very, very tough. I know for me personally, when I was going through, I was dealing with anxiety. That was what was going on with me, and it was coming from a feeling of being overwhelmed. And so when you carry that alone, right? And as a man, you're not sure who you can talk to, or should I go see a counselor? So if you're too afraid to go see a counselor, or you think it's not, you're not man enough or whatever, you're man enough to handle it yourself, that kind of thing. And then you're trying to look after it yourself. What you're doing is internalizing all of that. So if you carry that with you to work, I'm dealing with it myself. You carry home, I'm dealing with it myself. It's building up inside of you, and it actually can tear you apart. And then you don't become the man you want to be for your wife. You don't become the father you want to be for your kids. You start operating completely differently at home and at work. And I just say you're kind of become zombie-like, and
I like that.
So it's very unhealthy to get to that place of dealing with it alone. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and the research would support that. So we know that. We know that men suffer from depression and they don't seek help, and it often can lead, it's 3 times more likely that it leads to suicide and substance abuse. So we know that men are suffering emotionally. And so if you're a man and you're listening, you don't have to suffer alone. That's going to be our message through the whole podcast is you can reach out, and there are some good things. So I've invited Jesse because he's going to share his story with us about his, how he discovered moving from these 4 emotions and one being hunger to a more rounded, a better way of looking at emotion, and it not being this scary F word. Yeah. Right? So why don't you share with us a little bit?
Yeah, and it's not like I don't feel like I have all of this figured out. I think the window was opened up for me where, my mind was opened up to, oh my goodness, I know now what I'm feeling, and when you identify that, you can work from that. So I remember being in a work environment, and Lauren and I have moved a couple of times and had lots of changes in our lives, and so I got to a work environment that was high pace, very performance driven, which you always have an element of performance where you work. But when you're performance driven, there's always those timelines and expectations you have to meet, very timely. And if you don't get it, and accomplish those tasks, or at least accomplish them the way you're supposed to, certain environments will come down on you hard. And so for me, that was my experience. Here I am at a newer job, in a newer position, experiencing all of that and trying to figure out and run a pace that maybe I'm not used to running. And so there were tough conversations, right? Tough meetings. And it's hard when you have meetings where you really feel like you're failure, whether those words are said or whether it's just an impression that you're given. And for a man, When you feel like you have failed at something, that does something to your manhood. It makes you feel like you're not good enough. And then you start carrying that with you. So here I am feeling like a failure, and then going home at the end of the day thinking, man, I failed. And you're just trying to, you have dinner, you're trying to get through to the next day. Maybe I can come back. And then, time and time again, I'm going through this and trying to, fail forward and move forward and grow and learn from mistakes and treat it as an opportunity to grow. But it was weighing on me so heavily. I started to feel at first overwhelmed. Oh my goodness, there's so much going on.
So that's a key emotion, right?
Yes.
So like as you're sharing your story, I want to just, because we're talking about the F word today, right? So what I'd love is just to, sorry to interrupt, but just so overwhelming wasn't one of those feelings that you mentioned at the beginning, right?
Yes.
So you all of a sudden you have this new emotion. How did you process that? Or how did you try?
Yeah, well, and it came from a conversation. Someone brought it up and I was like, yes, that's exactly what I'm feeling. I am feeling overwhelmed. That is the word. And so I'm trying to process that. So I thought, okay, let's try and spread things out. Let's try to, I actually think I was further along than overwhelmed. I think overwhelmed was maybe 2 months before I realized I was feeling overwhelmed, if that makes sense. Yeah. So I was already too late. And trying to spread things out, not, keep my days shorter, keep them more simple, spread out the tasks. And I didn't recognize at that point that I was operating, out of fear either, which was another key emotion. I didn't recognize that until I started seeing counseling. And I think by the time I saw counseling, it was almost just, at the end of the story, really, is how it felt. So yeah, operating in overwhelmed, trying to figure it out day by day. Talking to Lauren about some of these things, so she knows that.
Yeah, Lauren is his lovely wife.
Lovely wife, yes, and she's amazing through this whole thing, really. But yeah, so here I am feeling overwhelmed, and trying to figure out what is my next step. And I think it would have helped knowing that I was operating out of fear, because when you're operating out of fear of, now I want to impress, my superiors and those above me, they're asking me to do this, and it may not be the things that need to be done, but it's the things they're asking me to do. So now I'm not operating the way that I normally would. I'm not, working with people the way that Jesse works with people, right? So here I am doing something maybe I'm not as passionate about, right? And trying to navigate all of that. So you move from overwhelmed, and then when I went to counseling is when I discovered fear, and we talked about that anxiety. So I actually had no idea, Leigh-Anne, I was experiencing anxiety during that time. So here I am overwhelmed.
So that's another emotion, right?
I know.
We have you said overwhelmment, we have fear, anxiety.
Yes.
Right.
But I never used anxiety. Okay. So as a man, you just never talk about that. What? I don't anxiety. And I actually, before I recognized what anxiety was, I probably would say I never really thought of it as, that kind of emotion that is something that we really need to address and look at. I didn't know it was something that you could treat and actually address.
So let's pause there just for a sec. So as someone who has experienced anxiety, and if you're not fully aware of that's what it is, could there be something in your body? Because men are like really like in tune with their body, right? They love sports. They love, doing certain things. They love woodworking. Like there's all sorts. Maybe they play music. Is there a way that, when thinking back on that, would there be something maybe that your body was telling you that, like, now looking back, you're like, oh, maybe it was that I was stressed out, but beyond stressed out, right? Like, we're not talking about, oh, I'm stressed out at work. We're talking about anxiety and fear going into work and slowing tasks down and performance anxiety, right?
Yeah, if you are waking up in the morning and not wanting to go to work, like not just, oh, I don't want to go to work today. No, like you're dreading the thought of your meetings. You're dreading the thought of what your superiors are going to say to you. If you wake up and you have heart palpitations, your heart feels like it's racing. You're like, I feel like I just ran a marathon. That was going on. Okay, so now you have crazy. If you come home at the end of a work day, and you're a zombie, okay? I call it you're on autopilot, you're eating your food at the kitchen table, okay, but you're just existing. And your wife and your kids, like, Earth to Dad, are you even around?
Almost like a blank expression?
Yeah, blank expression. I'm not just talking about just let me eat and I'll feel better. No, it's like if you are a zombie, you're coming home, you eat, you watch TV, you're just trying to make it to the next day, you probably are already there without even knowing it. And so here I was, those are what I was experiencing, feeling. My body was having these moments leading up to this. I knew something was off and wrong. Here I am afraid. I'm having heart palpitations. I'm not operating the same. I'm normally a talker, but now I'm really quiet and not saying much.
So you're withdrawn, right?
I'm withdrawn. I'm pulling back. Lauren's, just making sure everything's okay. So that, if you have those kinds of things going on, then yes, you might be experiencing some sort of anxiety, and don't be afraid to go see a counselor at that point, right?
So what I love about what you're saying is that sometimes we think emotions are all internal, like they're all in our mind. But what you're actually saying, and I love it, is that our emotions actually have physical ramifications, right? And so I think there's a disconnect a lot in our society that it's like, oh, it's just about the heart and the soul and like crying and things, and that's emotions, right? I think it's a really good point that you just made, that our emotions really can drive what's going on in our physical bodies, right? So when we get scared or afraid, all of a sudden something happens, our adrenaline goes off, and so we in counseling, right, we call that like it's really good because that's going to keep us alive, right? It's like our reactive to fear, right? And so oftentimes that's actually really good. The problem is our brains at times, and just like what I'm hearing in your story, was that it didn't really shut off because you had to go to work every day, and there was a fear there of not meeting bosses' expectations or deadlines. You didn't want to do the job anymore. Like it was like almost like I feel like a step in front of the other, right? It was like like instead of stepping or running towards the job, you're kind of like just trying to get there with like itty bitty steps, right? Like with like kids that don't want to like go to the bath, like right.
Well, men, it operates and actually manifests those feelings, sure, in your body. Men don't like that. We don't like that. We know that because when we play sports and somebody body checks you in hockey, you're like, oh, and now it's on. Now you're taking that emotion, you've applied it to what you're doing in that moment, and you're using it to make yourself better at a sport. But what we don't like is when we have an emotion that's going to break us down, and either like I don't want to cry. I don't want to cry. And I love that song Last Sunday, right? I don't want to cry. So men, we don't want to cry. We don't want to feel, anxiety. I don't want to feel heart palpitations. I don't want to feel depressed or dark or just trying to get by. We don't like it. And we don't know how to handle it or how to deal with it, right?
Yeah. So that's even like, can we just pause again? Because I feel like, what's the deal as a woman? Maybe this is just for me even too. Why is it... And where did you learn the idea of not crying? Like, can you explore that?
Sure.
For people, maybe there's a wife listening and she's like, yeah, like explain why that's so negative. Or like, what about that?
I don't know why there's this internal feeling of my wife actually is going to like me better if I don't cry. Lauren's never seen me cry. She's never actually physically seen me cry. I will just confess that right now. And because deep down there's this feeling of I'm the one who provides for the family, who cares, who looks after, who protects. She can't see me cry. She needs me to be strong. She will like me better if I'm that way, right? And so that's why it's like I don't want to feel those things. I don't want to cry. Where did it come from? Understanding all of this? It was just the fact that I had to go through some of these things to realize that and recognize that. So I'm working on it. I'm working on it.
Not that we want to do full-fledged therapy on this talk, but like, what would be the worst thing if someone like Lauren saw you cry? Like, what would be the worst?
I know, right? Like, what would be the worst thing that could happen? I honestly, I don't know. It's just I think it's the feeling of seeing me broken, right? It's like, I don't want, my best friend in the entire world to see me broken. I don't want anyone to see me that way. I want them to see me strong. And so as a man, that's what we work towards, right? It's like, I want you to see me strong and tough and that I've got it together. Jesse's looking after it. Jesse's got it. He's taking care of his life, that kind of thing, right?
Right. Yeah. Thank you for that insight.
Yeah, no problem.
Like you're like, this, like every woman went, oh, like, you know what I mean? So thanks so much for sharing that. So one of the things I heard you say is when you were in therapy, they explored feelings a lot, right? So,
sure.
Which is going back to the F word. I love that. I'm going to use
That's
that.
Great.
But a lot of feelings come from our needs either being met or not met. Could we just explore that just for a moment? So often, on feeling wheels, there's like color zones, right? So when your needs are met as, I'm going to say as a person, not just necessarily a man, when you're comfortable and when you're proud or when you know that you can trust your boss and there's a comfortability, there's a joyfulness, there's, you can like be peaceful and like risk, right? But the opposite is true at a workplace. Could you shed a little bit of more light on when your needs were not met? What started to happen in those moments when you were sad or surprised or like the big one you've said is scared, right? Can you get a little bit more deeper in the idea of you noticed you were scared, but then you went to counseling, and then how did it flip? Like, how did you recover? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So what were like some things?
Yeah, and that's huge. I think there's this need to be successful, this need to continue to bring security for my family. So yes, I don't want to get, fired. Yes, I want my job. I want everyone who's, watching me, that feeling of everyone's watching you, family members and extended family, to know that Jesse's taking care of his family and he's looking after everyone. And so when you have those moments of insecurity of, ooh, I don't know how long I am going to be here. Am I really going to have this job as long-term as I thought? Do they really want me? And you start operating out of that fear. Then you go to work and you're not sure of your relationship with your boss. So now you're not sure what you can talk to them about. You're not sure of how those conversations that you can have. You're not sure how much to let them in. Because if you let them in too much, are they going to let you go? Or if you actually tell them what's going on, are they going to have, that tough conversation? And so that for me was those kinds of moments. That's how I was operating. How did I recover? Well, I like to think there's some of me still recovering. And that's the hard part is there's so many broken pieces, right? When you go through some of these things, when you go through anxiety and you're trying to figure all this out, there's so many broken pieces and you're just picking them up, putting them back together. I spent a year, when I left my job, I spent a couple months, I took actually a couple months off, a couple weeks off actually, just to, and then I went out and got a job. Wherever I could. I just got a job. And then I spent a year trying to process what happened and picking up the pieces in my life. And you look at calling and you look at purpose and you look at career, you look at what am I doing, and you're trying to figure out all of those things. And so, yeah, the pieces were being picked up, the pieces, and Lauren was really great the whole time. What's kind of crazy about what she did for me was I think she didn't know what to do. So, and her not knowing what to do for me, she didn't do a whole lot. She didn't say much. She just supported. She would go into the bedroom and pray for me ridiculously hard. And I knew it, like I knew she was. I just felt it. I just knew she was praying her guts out for me. But yeah, there was nothing said, which actually was the best thing, because she wasn't sitting me down saying, you need to talk about these things. You need to get these things out. It's like, no. And I don't need to talk to her about it. And I don't even know if she wanted to hear everything. She just wanted to support me, which was one of the biggest things that she did for me during that time. So that is part of the recovery stage, I think, for me.
Wow, that's so good.
Yeah.
So what I heard in your story was like, there's almost like this hiding, right? Like the more and more you felt this anxiousness, the more and more you felt like you almost were like hiding away because you're like, or it almost like kind of like almost feels like you're building like a shelter
Yes.
or like a house, right? You're like, I don't know who I can trust. I'm going to put up this wall, and I don't know who I can trust, so I put up this wall. And it's almost reflective that it's like, then you start to build more layers
fight
to
or
that,
flight,
right? Yeah.
Right? So you either want to run away from the problem or you want to fight it.
Yeah.
Right. And I think this kind of brings in the illustration of I love using sport illustrations. You're in the boxing ring or you're in the octagon, you know, you're fighting. And I think one of the things is we always face different giants in our life. So you're always fighting a different battle. You're fighting a problem. You're fighting a situation. Okay. You're fighting somebody or not somebody, but you're fighting against some of these things in your life. Yeah. And so when it comes to fear and anxiety, there's always going to be that battle. Sometimes it'll be great. It'll be really big and you feel like you can't win. And sometimes it'll be really small, right? And so we have to celebrate those victories, those little moments that you overcome. You have to give yourself grace. You have to give yourself steps. You need the right support around you. One of the most important people in that arena, I always say, is the guy in the corner. Because the guy in the corner is your coach. He's looking after you. He's saying, do this move, you know, and get out of this and get off the ropes. And he's shouting the loudest in the arena. He's cheering you on the biggest. And I always like to say, my coach in the corner is Jesus. That's who's cheering me on. And I have to know that because it's better for me to fight. It's better for me to fight back than to run away and hide. If I run away and hide, I'm not doing anything about it, right? I'm going to, get to a really unhealthy state. So I come back and I fight, but I want to fight the right way, have the right tools, and the right coach in my corner.
I love that. I'm also hearing that it wasn't like a quick fix. Like you took some time off.
Yeah.
You got to ask some bigger questions. It wasn't that you were talking, but it was a processing time, right? So I think the encouragement here is whether talking works or therapy works, that's great. Do that. But if it's also just that you need some time to process, for women, I think a big suggestion that you said is like, just give them space. And when they need to talk, they'll talk, because his wife was just super supportive and she prayed and she went and she prayed more and she prayed more. Right. Yeah. And it wasn't like asking 1,000 questions or like, what do you need? What do you need? What do you need? It was like, I just need time to process. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's huge. Yeah. You need, and that's what men need. We need someone in our corner who's going to cheer us on. Get this. Okay. When I had the hard conversation at work and this job and I no longer had a job, that was a very long day. And here was my biggest worry. My biggest worry was, what is Lauren going to say? Oh. Because now I'm coming home and I have to tell her I don't have a job, right? I don't work there anymore. And we have a home and a mortgage, right? And all of that, we're trying to weigh our life and trying to figure things out. So now I have to have this conversation. And I'm afraid of what she might say because now I don't feel like I'm providing for my family, right? And what am I going to do afterwards? And how is she going to see me if I work retail, right? Versus my other job. How is she going to see me? Retail is a career for many people. I'm just saying, how is she going to see me if I work in the food industry, if I work wherever, delivering papers, like whatever it would look like. And I got home. And I remember she came home from work, and I'm trying to keep it together, right? And I had already had my cry. Again, she never saw me cry. And so I said to her, so, hey, Lauren, I don't work there anymore, right? And she just turned around and said, what? And I repeated myself. And this is it. She just laughed. She started laughing. And like just laughing hysterically. I stood there in shock. Like first I'm thinking, oh boy, something's wrong. What's going on? She heard me wrong. This can't be right, And then I realized it was this moment of relief that my wife, I didn't disappoint her. I wasn't less of a man. I was more of a man to her, actually, she said, because I didn't quit and give up. I kept going, as tough as it was. Even though she said, I would have supported you if you did. I would have supported you just as much. I'm proud of you that you did what you wanted to do in this moment, that I never pushed you to do anything. And that for me was huge. Yeah. Huge moment, yes.
Like that's huge, right? So for women, when we get news like this, we like just be mindful of this conversation that's happening right now, right? Because they're human, right? And they are going to have disappointments in their life. And so what I'm hearing is maybe it's not laughing. You know, some people might not react to that, but
Sure.
like that's unique to them, right? And that's their moment of how they dealt with it. Laughter is actually a great stress relief. So that doesn't shock me that it's laughter. But one thing that I've really noticed in your story, though, is that you started the conversation that was like, I was the problem. And then all of a sudden you moved to my anxiety was the problem. Like it wasn't always internal. It was like actually somehow in this conversation, even today, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't like I need to fix me versus I now have a problem. I now have a goal. I want something better, right? And whether like, so that's what I've seen. And so I think that's really what we would love men to embrace, whether that be in therapy or talking to like a guy who is like on your sports team, or maybe it is your coach, right? Maybe a young guy who's like, or maybe it's a teacher, whoever that person is. I think what you really need to do is not say you are the problem, that the process, you need to blame it on the process of fixing the goal, right? And we all need improvements. It's to realize that it's to come to the awareness that we're not perfect and that we really do want something better, right? And so for guys, I think it's just that. Like I think you nailed it on the head. It's like you weren't the problem anymore, right? The anxiety, those emotions, understanding that, and then process. I think that was so.
You have to wrap your mind around that. You're not the problem.
Yeah.
And what's going on, you can deal with it, and you can actually take steps to overcome. And you can take steps to fight these battles. And here's why. You go see a counselor. If you don't know what to do, and maybe you're at a stage and it's early on and you're not sure, and you're like, I think I felt some of these things Jesse's talked about. Maybe you're far along. Maybe you've had anxiety this entire time and you don't know what to do with it. Go talk to a counselor. Go talk to a therapist. If you're at a stage where you're like, no, everything's good in my life, I challenge that. And I say, hey, there's nothing wrong with going to see someone and talking to someone. And it's not about sitting together and talking about your feelings and, I don't want to talk about the feeling wheel. No. What you want to do is become a better husband, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You want to become a better father for your kids. If I want to be the best father I can be for Sophie, and Lauren's pregnant again for our next child. I want to be the best husband I can be. I want to be the best I can be in my workplace. So I want to be the healthiest me possible. If that means going to see a therapist and just talking some things out, every few weeks, sign me up right now. Let's do it, because I want to take those steps every day to grow and be the best man so I can be strong for my family, strong mentally and emotionally.
Wow. That is a great note to end on. Thank you for joining. Before we leave, we're going to get Jesse to pray over men and their mental health, because he has such a story to share with us, and he did such a great job at communicating, struggles or like strongholds that men really do have in just the way that they process different things, right? So, Jesse, do you mind praying for men and just how they process things and their journeys that they're on? Pray for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me. Father, we just, we come before you right now, Lord, and God, I just pause. There are those who might be listening today, God, and men who have been struggling with mental health and emotional health and not sure what to do or what steps to take, and maybe not even sure what they're feeling. And so, God, I pray that you would just impress upon their heart a step to take, a next step, that God, that we as men can operate the best we can be for our families, the best we can be for our marriages and for our kids. And Lord, I pray that you would continue to make and bond healthy and strong marriages and relationships. God, that men would be able to talk more of these things through, to identify what they're feeling, understand that it's not them that has a problem. There is no problem. It's something that you take with you, you deal with, and you battle it out each and every day. That God, I also pray that you would give us the strength to overcome. We know that you do, God, and I pray, Lord, for strength today and endurance in Jesus' name. Amen.